Welcome to Raul Effect, where we uncover the hidden psychology behind narcissists, toxic relationships, and emotional healing so you can stop chasing answers and start reclaiming your peace. What if the moment you walked away wasn't the end of their story, but the beginning of a psychological battle they never expected? Stay with me because today you'll discover what really happens inside a narcissist's mind when they realize you're never coming back. It often goes unnoticed, but beneath the behavior of many narcissistic people is a quiet belief that shapes almost everything they do in relationships. Deep down, they assume you will always be there. They believe that no matter how they treat you, no matter how many times they ignore your feelings or cross your boundaries, you'll continue returning. Your loyalty becomes something they stop appreciating because they begin treating it as guaranteed. But everything changes the moment that belief falls apart. Not when you pull away for a few days or create temporary distance, but when they finally realize you're truly gone. When your absence becomes permanent instead of a passing phase, it creates a psychological shift they never prepared for. The impact is much deeper than ordinary loneliness or regret because it forces them to confront realities they've spent years avoiding. To understand why this affects them so deeply, you first have to understand how many narcissistic individuals experience relationships. Healthy people usually see relationships as mutual connections where both people have the freedom to stay or leave depending on how the relationship develops. A narcissist often sees relationships very differently. Instead of viewing another person as an equal partner, they unconsciously begin seeing them as a dependable source of validation, reassurance, attention, or emotional support. Because of that mindset, your presence slowly becomes part of their emotional system. They expect you to be available whenever they need comfort, admiration, or someone to regulate their emotions. They stop questioning whether you'll remain because, in their mind, your role has become permanent. That is why genuine absence creates such a powerful disruption. They aren't simply losing a relationship, they're losing a psychological resource they quietly depended on every day. One of the first changes that usually happens is a painful adjustment to their sense of independence. During the relationship, much of their emotional stability may have relied on your constant presence without them fully realizing it. You may have reassured them, managed conflicts, calmed their emotions, listened to endless conversations, or simply provided an audience for their thoughts and needs. Once you're no longer there, they face a difficult question they may have avoided their entire life. Can they actually regulate themselves without someone else doing part of that work for them? This is especially difficult because many narcissistic individuals never developed strong internal emotional stability. Rather than learning to comfort themselves or process difficult emotions in healthy ways, they became dependent on outside validation. Your absence exposes that weakness. Suddenly, they aren't just missing company. They're confronting emotional skills they never fully developed. Another change often appears after enough time has passed. Memories they once ignored begin returning with surprising clarity. During the relationship, whenever you expressed hurt, disappointment, or emotional needs, those moments were often dismissed, minimized, or redirected back toward their own experience. Defensiveness protected them from having to truly examine your perspective. But once the relationship is over, there is no longer an immediate argument to win or image to defend. Without that pressure, certain memories begin resurfacing. They may suddenly remember conversations they brushed aside years earlier. They may think about moments when you tried to explain your pain or asked for understanding. These memories can become surprisingly vivid because the psychological need to suppress them is no longer as strong. This doesn't necessarily mean they've suddenly developed deep empathy. More often, it means their mind finally has enough distance to process information it previously refused to acknowledge. That delayed awareness often arrives long after it can repair the damage, but it can still be deeply unsettling. Another interesting shift happens in the way they talk about you after enough time has passed. While the relationship was active, criticism often served a purpose. Finding faults in you helped them avoid accountability, maintain control, or protect their own ego. Once you're permanently gone, that purpose begins disappearing. As a result, their descriptions of you sometimes become noticeably different. Instead of constantly criticizing you, they may quietly acknowledge qualities they rarely admitted before. They may recognize your patience, your loyalty, your kindness, or the stability you brought into their life. This change confuses many people because it seems completely opposite to how they behaved during the relationship. The difference is that they no longer need to minimize your value in order to maintain control. Without that ongoing power struggle, a more honest evaluation sometimes begins to emerge. Another powerful shift develops when they notice you're living well without them. Many narcissistic individuals become unusually focused on how your life is unfolding after the relationship ends. They pay attention to whether you're struggling, whether you've moved on, or whether you're genuinely happy. This isn't always because they simply miss you. Part of them expects your life to become harder without their presence. Their mind assumes they played such an important role that your happiness should decline once they're gone. When that expectation isn't met, when you continue growing, finding peace, building new relationships, or simply living well, it challenges one of their deepest assumptions. Your success quietly proves something they never wanted to believe. It shows that your happiness never depended entirely on them. For someone whose identity has been built around feeling indispensable, that realization can become one of the most difficult truths they ever have to face. What often matters most after someone permanently leaves a narcissist is not the loss itself, but what that loss forces them to face. Many people wonder whether walking away truly changes anything. The answer is more complicated than most expect. The fifth major shift is a slow and often uncomfortable awareness that nothing in life is guaranteed. Relationships they once assumed would always be there suddenly become proof that people can leave for good. That realization doesn't only affect the relationship they lost, it can make them question other connections they've taken for granted as well. For perhaps the first time, they begin wondering whether other important people could also choose to walk away. This matters because it creates a small fracture in one of their deepest assumptions. Instead of seeing relationships as permanent sources of validation, they're briefly confronted with the reality that every relationship depends on care, respect, and mutual effort. While this moment of awareness doesn't automatically create lasting change, it can become the first step toward genuine growth. The problem is that real transformation takes much more than a painful realization. It requires consistent self-reflection and long-term personal work. When you look at everything together, the pattern becomes much clearer. The loss of emotional stability, delayed recognition of past behavior, changes in how they speak about you, their growing fixation on your life without them, and their new awareness that people are not guaranteed to stay, all point toward the same truth. Your permanent absence doesn't simply leave an empty space. It forces them to confront beliefs that supported their entire emotional system. They must face the reality that people are not possessions, that relationships are not permanent resources, and that someone they assumed would always remain available is now truly gone. But an important question still remains. Do these painful realizations actually create lasting change? Or are they simply temporary reactions that disappear once someone new enters their life? This is where many people misunderstand what happens. Experiencing emotional discomfort is not the same as changing as a person. A narcissist may genuinely feel unsettled, regretful, or emotionally shaken after losing someone important. Those feelings are real, yet real emotional pain does not automatically produce healthier behavior. One of the biggest factors is how quickly they find another source of validation. Because many narcissists are naturally charming during the early stages of relationships, they often attract new attention surprisingly fast. Sometimes a new relationship begins before they've had time to fully process the emotional impact of the previous one. When that happens, the discomfort doesn't disappear because it has been healed. It disappears because it's been replaced. Instead of working through difficult emotions, they redirect their focus towards someone new who restores the admiration and reassurance they lost. The opportunity for genuine self-examination quietly fades as the new relationship fills the emotional gap. This is why lasting transformation is uncommon. Real personal growth usually requires sitting with discomfort long enough to understand it instead of escaping from it. If a new source of validation arrives too quickly, the deeper work often never begins. Another major influence is the kind of people surrounding them during this vulnerable period. If friends or family only offer sympathy while ignoring the behaviors that caused the relationship to end, they unintentionally reinforce the same unhealthy patterns. Constant reassurance without accountability allows the narcissist to believe they were simply unlucky or misunderstood, rather than encouraging honest reflection. Real growth is far more likely when supportive people are also willing to ask difficult questions. Instead of only comforting them, they gently encourage responsibility, helping them recognize how their own actions contributed to the loss. That balance of compassion and accountability creates a much stronger foundation for lasting change. Without those conditions, even powerful emotional realizations often become temporary experiences rather than permanent transformation. That's why some narcissists appear deeply affected after someone leaves, yet eventually repeat the same behaviors with another partner. The pain was real, but the lessons were never fully integrated. Real, honest support is surprisingly uncommon because it asks people to do something difficult. It requires showing compassion while also encouraging accountability. Most people feel more comfortable offering reassurance than challenging unhealthy behavior, especially when someone is emotionally hurting. That brings us to another major factor that determines whether a narcissist truly changes or simply goes through a temporary period of discomfort. Lasting growth requires the ability to sit with emotional pain without rushing to escape it. It means living with uncertainty, accepting uncomfortable truths, and resisting the urge to immediately replace the emotional void with something that feels easier. For many narcissists, this is incredibly difficult. Their coping strategies were built around avoiding unresolved emotional pain. Instead of staying with those difficult feelings long enough to learn from them, they often search for quick ways to reduce the discomfort. In many cases, that means creating a story that protects their self-image. Rather than honestly examining how their own behavior contributed to the relationship ending, they focus on outside explanations. They convince themselves that the breakup happened because of your flaws, bad timing, misunderstandings, or circumstances beyond their control. These explanations allow them to avoid facing the more painful possibility that their repeated choices played a major role in losing someone important. Another difference between temporary insight and genuine transformation is behavior. This distinction is one of the clearest ways to tell whether someone has truly changed. Anyone can say the right words after a painful loss. They may admit mistakes, sound reflective, or even appear deeply emotional. But real change is measured by consistent actions over time, not by emotional conversations during moments of crisis. If someone claims they've changed, but continues repeating the same unhealthy patterns in future relationships, avoids responsibility during conflict, becomes defensive whenever challenged, or only shows empathy when it benefits them, then the deeper transformation never really happened. Real growth becomes visible through everyday behavior. It appears in healthier communication, greater emotional responsibility, more consistent empathy, and a willingness to accept accountability without immediately shifting blame. Those changes don't last for a few weeks. They continue across different relationships and situations over many months and years. That's why actions always reveal more than words. Insight alone is never enough if it doesn't permanently reshape behavior. The final point may be the most important of all, because it has very little to do with the narcissist and everything to do with your own recovery. Whether they eventually become a healthier person or remain exactly the same should never determine your healing. Many people stay emotionally connected long after leaving because they're still searching for an answer. They want proof that their absence changed the narcissist forever, or confirmation that the narcissist never changed at all. Both desires keep your emotional energy tied to someone whose journey is no longer yours to manage. The healthier question is different. Instead of asking whether your absence transformed them, ask whether leaving transformed you. Everything we've discussed throughout this conversation, their loss of certainty, delayed realizations, changing perspective, growing awareness of your life without them, and the uncomfortable questions your departure forced them to face, shows one important truth. Your absence mattered. It had a real psychological impact, regardless of whether that impact became permanent or eventually faded. But what happens next belongs to them. Their future growth, or lack of it, is their responsibility alone. Your responsibility is your own healing. The greatest freedom comes when you no longer need an answer about their life in order to move forward with yours. You stop waiting for proof that they suffered enough, changed enough, or finally understood what they lost. None of those outcomes are required for your peace. The most meaningful transformation may never be theirs. It's yours. Maybe they expected you to return. Maybe they believed they would always find someone else. Maybe they eventually repeated the same patterns with another partner. Or maybe they finally faced themselves in a way they never had before. Whatever path they chose no longer changes yours. The moment you walked away for good, your life began moving in a different direction. You started rebuilding your confidence, reclaiming your identity, and creating a future that no longer depended on someone else's approval or emotional instability. That is the change that truly matters. Somewhere, someone who left a narcissist months or even years ago finally lets go of the need to know what happened afterward. They realize that the answer was never the key to their healing. At the same time, the narcissist continues on their own separate path, whether that leads to genuine growth or simply another cycle of temporary relief and repeated behavior. Those two journeys no longer need to intersect. Real peace begins the moment you accept that your story is no longer defined by what happened to them. Your absence may or may not have changed their life forever, but if it helped you rediscover your own worth, your own strength, and your own freedom, then it already changed the one life you truly have the power to transform, your own. If this video gave you a new perspective, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for Raul Effect. Remember, the greatest victory isn't changing a narcissist. It's becoming someone who never loses themselves again.